Have you ever watched a big company or an institution, maybe even a whole society, just start to, well, come apart at the seams? And you're left wondering, why? It always feels so chaotic, so unpredictable. But what if it's not? What if there's a hidden architecture to how things break down? That's exactly what we're going to get into.
Yeah, this is really the big question, isn't it? I mean, whether it's a political party that just can't seem to get anything done, a tech giant that totally loses its way, or a cultural movement that just implodes, the pattern feels weirdly familiar. So what is really going on underneath it all?
You know, when things start to go sideways, we usually point to these guys, right? We blame the bad leaders, the political drama, the ideological clashes, or just good old polarization. These are the go-to explanations, the things we see on the news every single day.
Okay, but here's the twist. What if these aren't the real reasons at all? According to the systems thinking in our source material, all of that stuff, it's just the symptoms. Think of it like a fever or a cough. They're just the loud, obvious signs that there's a much deeper, structural problem that you can't see.
All right, so for this first section, we're going to do something important. We're going to shift our whole perspective. We're going to stop getting distracted by the behavior we can see, and we're going to start looking at the invisible architecture that's actually causing all the trouble. So the big idea here is the word fragmentation. And I want you to try and forget all the usual ideas of chaos and messiness for a second. Instead, think of it like an architect's blueprint. Fragmentation is just what happens when the weight pressing down on a building, which we'll call the load, gets to be too much for its structure to support. It's not random. It's physics.
Okay, so let's dig into that central conflict a little deeper. Because it all boils down to this relationship between the demands on a system and its ability to actually cope with them. This is where the whole thing starts to go wrong.
And this is where you can really see the problem. As a system, any system, gets bigger and more complex, the demands on it, that load, they don't just add up, they multiply, they grow exponentially. You double the size, you might just quadruple the problems. But the system's structure, its ability to change and adapt, that improves so much more slowly, maybe one step at a time. This gap between the two is where the danger lies.
And that is the breaking point. It's the moment the system fails. And it's not because of one person or one bad decision. It's because the architectural integrity is just gone. The math doesn't work anymore.
You know, the thing is, this kind of collapse, it doesn't just happen out of the blue. Long before you ever see a crack on the outside, the whole thing is weakening from within. So let's look at how that actually happens.
So, every system, and I mean every system, is held together by something we can call coherence. And the best way to think about it, it's like an invisible glue. It's the shared understanding, the common identity, the thing that lets all the different parts work together toward the same goal. The problem is, as a system gets bigger and bigger, that glue starts to get, well, less sticky. First, different groups and departments, the substructures, they start to drift apart. They develop their own priorities. Then, trying to coordinate between them becomes a nightmare. And eventually, the whole thing just splits because there's nothing really holding it all together anymore. And here's another thing. Systems don't just break randomly. They tend to break along these pre-existing weaknesses, which you could call fault lines. These might be old arguments, inequalities, historical tensions, things that are dormant when everything is small and simple. But as that load we talked about increases, it puts pressure on these fault lines and turns them into huge structural cracks.
Okay, this brings us to a really interesting question, one you've probably thought about yourself. Why does it always feel so sudden? You know, one day things seem kind of normal, and the next, it feels like the whole world is falling apart. Well, it turns out the way we think things fall apart is usually wrong. Large systems rarely crumble piece by piece. They have this amazing ability to absorb more and more stress, holding it all together, until, all at once, they can't.
The actual mechanism has a name. It's called a threshold cascade. And really, it's just a fancy way of saying a domino effect. See, when one piece finally fails, its load doesn't just disappear. It gets dumped onto all the pieces around it, pushing them that much closer to their own breaking points.
So let's just walk through how this actually plays out. It all starts with just one part of the system hitting its absolute limit. It just cannot handle one more ounce of pressure.
Right, so that pressure, that load, it doesn't just vanish. It has to go somewhere, so it instantly gets shifted onto all the adjacent parts of the system, which dramatically increases the stress they're under. And now, those neighboring parts, which were probably already struggling, suddenly get hit with this extra load they were never designed to handle. And boom, they get pushed over their own limits too. And that is what triggers the chain reaction.
It just ripples through the whole system, creating this rapid system-wide failure. It's not one domino falling after another, it's like the whole table of dominoes going down at once.
So you see, that moment that feels so sudden, it's an illusion. It was anything but sudden. The pressure was building, that invisible glue was decaying, and those fault lines were getting deeper and deeper for a long, long time. We just didn't see it until the very last domino fell.
Okay, so what does this all mean? What's the takeaway here? In this last part, we're going to completely reframe how we think about fragmentation, and it might not be what you expect. This slide, this really brings it all together. On the left, you've got all the behaviors we see every day, the anger, the conflict, the messy failures. That's all just noise. On the right, you have the actual structural causes we've been talking about, that decaying glue, the fault lines, the unstable load. That's the cause, that's the signal. And this leads us to the final, and maybe the most powerful idea of all. Fragmentation isn't just about death and decay. It's the messy, often painful, but totally necessary way that a complex system breaks down an old architecture that isn't working anymore to make way for a new one. It's a transition, not just an ending.
So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. Now that you can tell the difference between the noise and the cause, now that you understand how that pressure builds up silently before the final cascade, what systems in your own world, big or small, do you see showing these exact same architectural strains?